You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, and on this episode, we try to answer the question, why do modern horror movies love the 80s so much? From synthwave to VHS screen, kids on bikes going to their local mom and pop video store, modern horror movies love the 80s, and we try to find out why. Here we go. Listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, one of your hosts, Bernie Gonzalez, with me as always, fellow co-host Pete Charbonneau. Pete, there is a term that I think we've thrown out there in our many podcast conversations that folks may not be familiar with, but I think it might help contextualize what we're going to talk about today. And the term being halcyon days. It refers to a period of calm, peace, nostalgia, often idealized as a golden age. Is that kind of like your understanding how you've used the term?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't drop halcyon days on a daily basis, maybe every other week. You know, I do have like a little alert on my phone.
There you go.
Kind of reminds me, he's like, Pete, you haven't used halcyon in a sentence in a couple of weeks now. Why don't you, when you get to it, work it in something?
It's a term we've used a few times, and I think it becomes very specific to conversations we're having, especially when we're waxing nostalgic about certain eras that we've grown up with that have influenced us, that we are nostalgic for. I did, just because, I like context, I did have to go back. So I'm like, all right, what's the origin of this word? Turns out the term comes from Greek mythology. The word halcyon refers to a kingfisher bird, also known as Alcyone in myth. And the legend says that Alcyone, mourning her drowned husband, was transformed into a bird by the gods. And during her nesting period, the winds and the seas were calmed for 7 days so she could lay her eggs in peace. Those became known as halcyon days. I think in day-to-day speech, when people use it, we're really kind of talking about the good old days, a time that we remember that might be simpler, happier, that evokes nostalgia, that allows us to reflect about the past.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, well, it's interesting, thank you for the education on where halcyon comes from. But yeah, I think, we do it all the time on the podcast. We definitely have an affinity for a certain time period that tends to be the early to mid 80s. It makes sense for us because of just our upbringing and our age, frankly. That was a time of tremendous influence on us, everything from growing up, catching the early Star Wars movies to, I think we did an episode on, was it 84 or 85, which was kind of like the year for movies where it was just like Beverly Hills Cop, Back to the Future. They all kind of came out in that 1 year, and you're just kind of like amazed to be like, that was 1 year's worth of movies. And it's like, that could have been like a 5-year run. But, no, it was condensed to that one time period. Pop culture was kind of like leading up to that moment, and it was like condensed and crystallized and came out fully formed that 1 year where there was that explosion of movies.
Soon to compete are some very dazzling science fiction films.
There are a lot of great years for movies, but 1982 is the greatest.
That's the year that I officially fell in love with movies.
I can't think of a year during my life that the lineup was equivalent.
Week after week, you have one classic movie after another that holds up 40 years later.
It was this great moment where nerds accidentally won.
There are 2 Steven Spielberg movies coming out within a week of each other.
They're here.
I remember calling my agents and saying, I don't know how much this is going to do for me, but I think it's going to do a lot for the world.
I'm getting chills even thinking about it. It was one of the most transporting movies I'd ever seen.
You could certainly argue there were better years for cinema, but there's no greater geek year than 1982.
That's kind of our wheelhouse of what we grew up in. And because we were of that age where we were taking it all in, we were soaking it in, and we had the toys, we had the video games, we had the comics, we had all the stuff related to it, because that was also the rise of, the commercialism. And you weren't just going to see the movie, you were coming home to play with the action figures, or you're going into the woods across the street to play it with your friends.
Ghostbusters! Each sold separately.
Break out the new equipment! Ghost trap set. Ecto goggles down. It's Marshmallow Man! Ecto Puffer ready! Neutronal Blaster charged! Roast him! Got him! We ain't scared enough!
It's the Ghost Trap from the real Ghostbusters. New from Kenner.
If you want to take the cynical side of things, yes, there's some crassness to it. But if you want to look at the positive side, which is what I like to do, it was just a great fountain for creativity. I'd like to think that all of that stuff that got funneled into our brain and still is in our brains, served a good purpose.
Like you said, the positiveness, the halcyon, the haze of it all that makes you nostalgic for that era. I've also heard about pop culture and how it moves roughly in like 20-year cycles of nostalgia. So you have children who grew up in like a particular era and they reach adulthood, creating, curating, consuming stuff that reflects the things they remembered. That cycle seems to happen every 20 years ago, and it's fashion, music, film styles. For example, like you have in the 1970s, you've got Lucas and Spielberg, two big influential filmmakers that were part of our childhood. And they grew up from the 30s and 50s. So like pulps, serials, Flash Gordon, creature features, all from their youth. And then we grow up watching Raiders, watching Star Wars. And we see that the space opera, that idea of Flash Gordon, the serials, the cliffhangers, matinee type adventures.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of it comes down to storytelling, right? And it's just taking their formative years freshened up by taking, a modern day or a current day lens to a timeless theme. It could just be technology is way better than it was in the 40s and 50s. And so now we've got some cutting edge special effects that's allowing us to present something in a way that feels a lot more real than what we grew up watching 50s sci-fi where, all the strings were visible on the rocket ship as it blasted through space. A modern audience now might look at it and be like, it looks a little bit dated. You can see some of the cells composited over the film, but just in the rapid growth of what you could do in terms of storytelling, in terms of effects, in terms of capturing in audiences and especially a young audience's imagination that has now, like you said, 20 years on, those of us that were 7, 10, 12, 15.
When you think about, all right, 1980s, we grew up and like you said, we're in our formidable years, we're sponges, we're taking all of this. And then we grow up to see the 2000s, the early aughts, where you see pop culture reflecting that 20-year cycle. For an era, the 1980s, that is now over 40 years old, it's double that so-called like 20-year cycle. The 80s just won't die. And we see that in TV, in movies, in books, in comic books, in video games. So asking that question, like, why the 80s? Why the 1980s? Especially when you think about modern horror movies, not all, but just generally kind of like this trend that modern horror movies do have an easy time embracing the 1980s.
I think that's right. I don't know that I have a good answer as to why or even a good theory as to why. I don't know what I'm talking about, but here, let me talk for the next 5 minutes about what I don't know what I'm talking about. And
literally the premise of every podcast, Pete. We'll go big picture, right? Like cultural, technological, tropes, aesthetics, all of these different factors. And I'm going to throw a few at you. See if some of these things are factors that you would agree with that help kind of inform why modern horror movies really love the 1980s.
This Halloween, after the kids are done trick-or-treating and are safely tucked away in their bed, it's time to get scared. Come on down to Fan2Fan Vids, where for the whole month of October, rent 2 frightfully good films, get the third one free. Come browse our latest and scariest selection of VHS rentals, and remember, don't be afraid of no ghosts. Fan2Fan Vids, make it a Fan2Fan fright.
The analog media environment in home VHS and the fact that we grew up with mom and pop video stores, direct to video, people had access to horror. They could go to their video stores like we've talked about and wax poetic on many episodes. But there is something about the act of going to a location, trying to find that one movie or movies that you're going to watch that evening versus surfing thumbnails. there's something about the medium being the message where the aesthetics of the analog become part of the character. Again, the mom and pop store culture, the neon at the Blockbuster, your local mom and pop store, the VHS grain, it's all part of analog. There's something about that that's appealing.
And at the risk of get off my lawn-ism, I feel like an advantage that we had back then that I think is different now. But again, I don't know what I'm talking about, so take it with a grain of salt. But what I liked about when we were growing up and doing the video store thing is I feel like we had more work to do. Well, maybe I don't mean more work to do. We were being sold something in a very narrow, specific way. And I'm talking specifically about going to the video store, and we've talked about this many times, where you're getting sold on the box art, maybe to a lesser extent, the summary on the back that may have a handful of stills from the movie that are going to maybe bring it home. But we had no internet to really know. We had word of mouth from our siblings, cousins, older friends that maybe had gone to see the Funhouse in the theater. And we're like, oh, that movie's going to scare the shit out of you if you rent it.
Tonight, in the Funhouse, something waits for Amy. Something deadly. Something evil. Something that feeds on the flesh of young innocents. Something that tonight will turn the Funhouse into a carnival of terror. The Funhouse, rated R. Children under 17 not admitted without parent.
And I feel like now, and I find it doing myself, because I will scroll for 20 or 30 minutes on a streaming platform, just rolling through. And it's not to take away from the artwork on the thumbnails, but it's very different. It's not as tactile because it's just kind of running by you on the screen. And at the end of the day, if you do come across something that looks interesting, you've got all this other information at your fingertips that can kind of help you, inform you within the span of like seconds, literally, like, you know, whether it's an IMDb rating or a Rotten Tomatoes rating, or if you want to just do a quick Google search, I'm sure there's a Reddit thread with a bunch of people talking about, is this movie any good, or why it sucks, or why it's great. And that's all amazing. And that's fantastic. And that helps inform how you want to spend your time. But there is something halcyon-like of that experience of going to a video store and you're there with your friends and your friend picks out one movie, you pick out another one, you kind of bring them together and you're both looking at the box. They're like, oh, this artwork looks really cool. This movie's going to be sick. And then, you know, you might have a different experience when you actually put the tape in and hit play. But that's a very old school specific way of trying to sell you on an experience that I think has just changed. It's not good and it's not bad. It's just, this is what technology gets you. And this is what being connected on the internet gets you. It's like, it's all at your fingertips and you have to do the work of like searching and doing that. But yeah, I think there's just something different about when you're doing it as a kid. Maybe it's a newspaper clipping that you saw.
Sure.
When a movie came out that intrigued you. But it was much more limited in scope. You had less information, but that kind of expanded your imagination a little bit. It's like the possibilities seemed a little more endless than they do now, where it's just like, yeah, this movie looks like trash. Let's just scroll on to the next one and scroll on to the next one and scroll on to the next one.
Figure in a world where we have access to endless amount of trailers, Rotten Tomatoes, Wikipedia, kind of leaning back into the idea of like the analog nature of it all. Your Letterboxd was that kid in the cafeteria in high school or grammar school that told you that movie was amazing. And that's all you had to go on. If that could be backed up with really good airbrushed cover art on the VHS, that's all you had. And I think that kind of leans into what you're talking about, that we had such a limited amount of information to work with that either it was going to live up to what the kid during lunch told you, or you were going to be incredibly disappointed and you just realized that the VHS cover art was way over its skis, out kicking its coverage, whatever other sports, athletics, and metaphor you need to kill in here. It's like, nope, that was great cover art, not such a great movie. But again, that kind of leads into the analogness of it all.
I feel that there's probably more variety just in terms, just within genres now. You know, when back in the 80s, you had your major motion picture releases, your Friday the 13th, Paramount, and you had certainly after the rise of video, then you had your direct-to-video stuff, the full moon type things.
Be sure to stay tuned for Video Zone after this feature presentation.
And that was really kind of it. And I feel like now it runs the gamut. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's direct to streaming, but you've got more. And again, talking technology, like you can film a movie on your phone now, and you've got the software to cut it and edit it and produce something that looks fairly polished. So if you don't like one type within a genre, like there's all these other options out there for you now.
I think that leans into that whole idea of like the medium is the message, because part of the medium at that time when we were growing up that was so formidable for us is distribution. You rented a movie. If it disappointed you, you couldn't just click to another thumbnail and just watch another movie. I mean, there was just something very deliberate about going to get something physical that you took back home with you in your backpack, hopped into the VHS, and it broke your heart because it just wasn't very good. Versus now, and again, this is less of an argument, the whole, like you mentioned, the get off my lawn argument. Now you could watch a movie, and if it disappointed you, you could easily move on to something else, and it doesn't waste your time if it just doesn't vibe with you. If this is just not the movie I thought it was going to be, you can move on and you can watch easily another movie. There is something that's that amazing about that accessibility, but again, that the limitations of the analog nature of the distribution of the medium made it so that we could only make certain decisions. You get 2 for $1, $2 for $1 rentals, Monday nights. It's a 50-50 proposition. I'm hoping one of these two movies, Death Spa or Blood Hunt, is pretty good because those titles and those airbrush covers, they sold me. So let's hope the Spa or the Hunt are pretty solid.
Yeah, I think there's also, and we've talked about this as well, going to the movies was a bigger deal back then than it is now. So it was more of like the event to go to. I can still put myself in line with my friends. John was one of them, and our friend Pete DeVito, asking some guy in front of us if they could be our quote unquote uncle to get us into Friday the 13th. I think it was part 7.
Jason is back. 3 times before, you have felt the terror, known the madness, lived the horror. But this is the one you've been screaming for. Because Friday, April 13th, will be Jason's unlucky day. Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Rated R, under 17, not admitted without parent.
I don't know if I'd go far to say that it was a rite of passage, but it kind of was. Like, it was sneaking into a movie. There was something a little bit exciting about that because it was rated R and we were 15, 16, however old we were. But it was a big deal to just, not even just for a rated R movie, but just to go to the movies. Like, it just seemed to be more of a destination than it is now. And I'm not saying that it's like an afterthought, because obviously people still go to the movies. I still love going to the movies, but I think that's like an added thing to it as well. Like, if something was coming out through the trailer, again, you didn't have all this extra information. Like, you couldn't get too much spoiled. If you wanted to read a review in the newspaper, you could maybe do that. And then it was like word of mouth. Like, if your friends happened to go see it before you did and they were hyping it up, that made you want to see it even more. The actual physical act of getting driven to the theater, being amongst like just a mass of your peers and other kids. And just, there was an excitement about that too.
Let's go to another potential factor for why maybe modern horror movies love the 80s. Broader cultural anxieties. And I think we grew up at a time with the Cold War, certain economic conditions. I think suburban malaise was starting to kind of define itself in its own ways. Moral panic between Dungeons and Dragons and heavy metal, rock music, as we've kind of talked about on other episodes, certainly slasher films, all kind of reacting to conservative culture that was trying to fight against all of these anxieties that were happening, especially to people of our generation, like young adults, teenagers that were growing up exposed to this stuff, watching MTV, checking out new music that was not too dissimilar from generations before, where you had Beatles and Elvis Presley that had caused so much chaos. Now we were listening to music and watching movies that were part of all of this broad cultural anxiety.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was like if it felt like there was a speeding up of it, but I remember specifically there was like one year for Christmas, I got Duran Duran's Rio on cassette. And this was, it had to be like 83-ish, probably like a year after it had come out. And I was so excited, and I popped it into my stereo, and I was playing it Christmas morning, playing it a little too loud for my dad's liking. Would you turn that down? Fast forward a year later, 1984, and I'm getting Motley Crue's Shout at the Devil on cassette. So I went from Duran Duran to Motley Crue, in the span of a year. And I'm sure my dad was probably wishing that I would put the Duran Duran cassette to play that than Motley Crue at that point. So that was all part of it. Yeah, like there always seemed to be something that was like going to be the next thing that was going to corrupt the youth. And when you're young, you don't realize that that's just something as old as time, as like the older generation and the establishment is always propping up some boogeyman to be like, this is going to be, what's going to take down the youth, and our youth is going to be lost if we don't rein them in. Before that, it was comic books are going to rot kids' minds. And
well, what about the effect of these comic books on the children?
All of our testimony from psychiatrists and children themselves show that it's very upsetting, that it has a bad moral effect, and that it is directly responsible for a substantial amount of juvenile delinquency and child crime.
There's always something to kind of gloss over the lack of attention to really finding out what it takes to engage and raise a generation of kids that are just by nature going to be curious and want to try some things out, and they're going to experiment, and some of the things they're going to experiment with are not going to be great, maybe. But hopefully at the end of the day, it's nothing that's too self-destructive, and there are lessons that you learn, and you grow up and you become a better person, or you become a wiser person or a stronger person from that. And it seemed like growing up in the 80s, whether it was, the Parents Resource Music Center, the PMRC, or whatever that thing was that was started by Tipper Gore, that was slapping labels on music and talking about how, heavy metal was, going to be, again, that was going to be another end of the youth, was listening to these horrible Satan worshiping acts that were just.
And we're back with evangelist and moral crusader, the Reverend Aaron Gilstrom, who's dropped by with some visual aids. We're talking today about rock pornography, and I'll have to agree with you. We have some pretty ribald stuff here. Those rockers really have a strange sense of humor, don't they?
I don't even think it's a sense of humor. I think they're just out-and-out sick people. And they're trying to make everyone else around them who listens to their music as sick as they are.
You look back on it now, and it's like, wow, this is pretty tame stuff. But at the time, this was like life or death, according to our elders.
Something you said there, too, about like acceleration, where it kind of felt, and I'm sure it probably feels like this for every generation, that, kids are growing up so fast. That initial accessibility we had to technology and pop culture made it feel like maybe we were growing up faster. And I think there's something about maybe another factor, that desire to seemingly return to like a simpler life, where like in the 1980s, we didn't have social media. We didn't have cell phones. Picturesque halcyon belief of like kids on bikes and unsupervised teens. And we've kind of talked about this before, the rise of camping and summer vacations, all the stuff that ends up actually working out as perfect traps for all of those 80s inspired horror slashers. Like, yeah, send all your kids to camp so the guy with the machete and the hockey mask can kill them all in one very isolated, separate place. But there is something about that sort of like kid on bikes aesthetic that makes it feel like we're kind of trying to get back there again. We've seen that with Stranger Things. We've seen that obviously with other movies that kind of harken back to the feeling that Goonies originally gave us in the 80s. And that idea that, yes, is Goonies Stand By Me supposed to represent a simpler time? Maybe that's what kind of modern horror is trying to say in its own ways. Like, if we do take out cell towers, we don't have the luxury of grabbing a phone and saying, Hey, Mom. Yeah, I'm doing fine. Yes. I earned my merit badge. Yes. Also, there's a slasher killer let loose on our camp. Can you please call the cops? Thank you. End of movie.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, there was certainly more freedom back then, but again, like I don't know if that is a selling point for younger generations now. Like, do they view that as a good thing because they've just been brought up so differently than us Gen Xers who are like, just leave me alone to do my thing. And maybe some of those horror movies from the 80s, I guess maybe were a reaction to some of that, what you talked about. Yeah, because I mean, talked about it many times. Like my brother and I were left to our own devices for so many hours of the day. Like we were sent off to friends. We didn't do overnight camps, but I was at day camp in the summer. Our parents, they weren't asking where we were as long as we were home at 6 for dinner every night. Whatever we were doing getting up to before that, like I think there was a certain amount of trust in what we were doing. But at the same time, I don't think there was like that overarching fear of like, well, something's going to happen. I mean, and we had assemblies about walking in groups when you're going to school.
That's Jenny. But that's not Jenny's dad. If she gets into that car, you may be looking at Jenny for the last time. I'm McGruff, the crime dog. Let me show you something. See that playground? A lot of kids there. Every day in this country, 60 kids disappear. Some run away, but a lot are kidnapped by strangers or even by people they know. Almost 20,000 kids a year. 20,000 kids, one kid at a time. Maybe your kid, on your street, just like Jenny. You know, your kids can learn to protect themselves against crime at home, at school, on the street. Learn how to keep your family and your community safe and help take a bite out of crime.
Stranger Danger, the creepy van that comes around, or that one Different Strokes episode that took a very different tone with Arnold where he gets kidnapped.
Hello, I'm Conrad Bain. Tonight on Different Strokes, we are presenting the first half of a two-part show on a very important subject, the dangers of hitchhiking. We urge families, children, and parents to watch this special episode together because some of the material presented might be disturbing to younger children. Thank you.
Doesn't he essentially leave Mr. Drummond, go hitchhiking, get picked up by a seemingly well-mannered, assuming guy, and then it turns very dark? But
there's that one. I was talking about the one guy that owned the shop,
that's right.
Taking pictures of Arnold and Dudley with their shirts off, and
the fact that there's two of these episodes, folks, on Different Strokes.
A very 80s thing was a very special episode of otherwise innocuous sitcoms to try and tackle serious topics. But it was kind of odd that something, a vehicle that was just usually so irreverent and so slapstick would all of a sudden be and now we got to get serious. I can tell you when I would go upstate with my family, more than one occasion, my aunts, and this is not a criticism because this was just the time. My aunts were always wanted to be very helpful. They picked up hitchhikers all the time in upstate New York. That would be someone's great starting point to write a horror film. Nothing bad ever happened, but that was also on the cusp of all of that stranger danger stuff. We're up in the mountains in upstate New York, and you'd see a hiker just kind of walking one of the country roads and just pull over, where do you got to get to? Oh, I'm going to Hensonville. Oh, that's kind of on our way. Come on, we'll give you a lift. And that's just what happened. And that happened a lot.
Hitchhiker?
Should we pick him up? Oh, yeah, man. Pick him up. He'll asphyxiate out there.
What does he look like?
Well, the son of a bitch is going to smell just like the slaughterhouse.
Oh, give the guy a break. He can sit by Franklin.
What do you want to do?
Oh, he's
Pick him
weird
up, man.
looking. No.
Well, I think we just picked up Dracula.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre is, you've got the guy hitchhiking that they pick up in the van who was not a pleasant experience.
It's funny you say that, because then I think obviously immediately the one counselor in 1980s, the original Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
She gets picked up by, spoiler alert, Miss Voorhees. And Miss Voorhees obviously has some other not so nice intentions for these counselors. if you really think about it too, because the second you said hitchhiker, I was thinking, in the original Halloween where Dr. Loomis ends up going to essentially call back the institution to say, oh, he's escaped and he's made his way back to Haddonfield. And you remember the part scene where he pulls over by the train and he sees that there is the mechanic's like pickup truck.
Yeah.
If you really kind of work back that scene, you can almost imagine the mechanic who, again, spoiler alert, gets killed and gets found in this field with his overalls being taken off, thus Michael Myers' clothes. You can almost imagine he sees a patient maybe walking on the highway, and he's going to pick him up because he's thinking, oh, well, this person's not doing so well. Let me pick up this hitchhiker and help him out. Turns out also it just happens to be Michael Myers. And then Michael Myers has him pull over because, he's choking him and killing him, and then takes his overalls. So in some ways, Friday the 13th, Halloween, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the Rutger Hauer movie, The Hitcher. It's in the title versus a present day where we encourage kids not to open their candy when they're actively trick-or-treating and to open it all at the house under their parent supervision, because we grew up at a time when there could be razor blades and apples.
The witches, warlocks, ghosts, and goblins went door to door tonight collecting candy. Many parents went along with their trick-or-treaters to make sure nothing went wrong and to keep their kids from eating any of the candy before they had a chance to look it over. Most Austin hospitals also got in the Halloween spirit and x-rayed treats free of charge to make sure there were no unwanted surprises inside the candy. Brackenridge, Seton, and St. David's all reported a big turnout at their x-ray centers, but say they found nothing hidden in any of the treats. Police and sheriff's departments also report a quiet Halloween night.
You talk about films like Halloween, which again we've talked about before many times on the show. Everyone's kind of feeling cozy and comfortable in the suburbs because, oh, isn't this some kind of modern utopia? We've got all these families and we have block parties together, and we all kids go over each other's houses, and everyone's friendly and everyone knows each other. So what danger could possibly come into this tight-knit, fun community? And it's like, well, it can and does happen, and you don't know everyone's secrets all the time, and there could be a problem there.
And it's not a place that you think that anything evil could take place, but it's people are trapped in there, and they scheme, and there's trouble in the suburbs always.
It goes back to my idea. Am I thinking of, is there a freedom back then that doesn't exist now that you could have, and you can base a movie now where you've got a car full of teenagers driving somewhere, and yes, you don't have a cell phone, but you don't need the back point of like the parents worrying about where they're going. It's like, hey, we're going camping for the weekend, or we're going here for the weekend. And like, you don't even have to work that into the story. You just have to focus on this group of people because that's just the way that it was back then. And it was a different type of freedom.
But I think like what you're talking about, right? Like if you had that car full of kids, if you watching a modern day, present day horror movie, and you have that car full of teenagers pick up a hitchhiker, the audience could not suspend their belief because that's just unlikely to happen. However, you take that same plot and place it in the 80s, you all of a sudden have an audience now that's be like, oh yeah, that's how it was in the 80s. You could pick up hitchhikers. It was a simpler time. So it's almost like permissible, which allows the plot to happen.
There's always going to be, I think, maybe a fondness on our parts, but maybe on people that have grown up later, maybe there's like an interest into like, oh, wow, like you grew up like that. Like that seems, because it has to feel very foreign to the way other generations were raised, because it is very different. So we have the benefit, because things turned out okay for us, to be like, yeah, it was fine. Like, this is just what we did.
First of all, don't panic. Remain calm and find the nearest streetlight in your area. Do not move away from the light. There might be danger in the... Once daylight returns, you can safely resume your activities.
And that's the end of part one of our attempt to answer the question, why do modern horror movies love the 1980s so much? In part two, we're going to get into some of the practical aspects of this question, at least in trying to answer this question. We all know that the 1980s was a golden age for slasher horror films, but beyond all of the direct-to-video and theatrical releases in the slasher horror genre, there were some monumental advances in special effects and also in music that were part of the DNA of what makes a 1980s horror movie, what kind of lends to the vibe of what we all think a 1980s horror movie looks like and sounds like and feels like. And certainly people like Stan Winston, Rob Bottin, Tom Savini contributed to all of the gore, the effects that makes a 1980s horror movie look the way it does on the screen, that filmmakers in the present day are trying to attempt to recreate as best as they can. And also in the synth wave, the music that just makes a 1980s movie sound like it's from that era. And we see that so much now in modern horror movies, that quick connecting of the dots for the audience. Hey, this movie sounds kind of like the 1980s, so let's transport the audience to that place. And also in part two, we also throw out a number of examples of modern day horror movies that really lean into the 1980s vibe and really demonstrate all of these things that we're talking about. Good examples, good movies, maybe movies you've watched, maybe you haven't. Check out part two. And as always, thanks for listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast.